Morning. Please settle down. We'd like to start. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone slept well after yesterday's dinner. Now we are moving on to the more serious part of our gathering. And to start, I would like to invite Geshe Tsetela and Medo Rinpoche to please come on stage and do the invocation. Thank you so very much, Krishna and Rinpoche. We're very grateful that you could be here this morning to start our inaugural. And our next speaker this morning is Honorable Nicholas Peksa. He's a member of European Parliament from the Czech Republic since 2019 and president of the Tibet Interest Group. Mr. Peksa has been at the forefront for Tibet in the European Parliament. Under his chairmanship, Mr. Tibettv has initiated discussions on Tibet, received Tibetan leaders, met with human rights defenders, tabled parliamentary questions, resolutions, and organized film screenings. He also headed a parliamentary delegation to Dharamsala last March. The Tibet Intergroup, as you know, was established in 1989 following the visit of His Holiness to the European Parliament in 1988, but was relabeled Tibet Interest Group in 2014. But it continues to be our base of support in the European Parliament. Nicholas, we are very grateful for your dedication and for your support for Tibet. We know we have the European elections coming up, but irrespective of the result, we know you will be always on our side and we can count on you. Thank you, Nicholas, for all your support and for being here this morning. I would now like to give you the floor.
Dear friends, it is a great honor and privilege that I can welcome you all to the 9th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups here in the heart of Brussels. I am more than happy to see such a large number of representatives in this room from all around the world connected by one cause, and that's the fight for justice for Tibet. This gathering stands a testament to our unwavering commitment to the cause of Tibet and its people. As a parliamentary group supporting Tibet from around the world convene, we embark on a journey of solidarity, advocacy, and action. Tibet, with its rich cultural heritage and profound spiritual legacy, has long been a beacon of hope and inspiration. Yet behind this facade of serenity lies a stark reality of oppression and injustice. The human rights situation in Tibet remains a cause for grave concern. The Tibetan people continue to endure violations of their fundamental rights, including restrictions on freedom of speech, religion, and assembly. We hear horrifying reports of children being dragged away to boarding schools for re-education, Chinese officials linking different biometric surveillance systems to consolidate control, arbitrary arrests, and other human rights violations. Reading this news, we must realize that our support for Tibet is as important as ever. As representatives of Tibet support groups, it's our duty to amplify the voice of the oppressed and marginalized. Our collective advocacy must transcend borders and ideologies, uniting us in a common pursuit of justice and dignity for the Tibetan people. I would like to call on us to strengthen our cooperation, exchange the best practices, and learn from each other. Only a strong network of support groups from Washington, D.C. to Dharamsala can stand up to the Chinese Communist Party and demand justice and dignity for Tibetans. Our advocacy works here in the European Parliament could benefit from the experience of parliamentary support groups in European member states. And all of us in Europe could learn a lot from the support group in the United States, where just last week the Resolve Tibet Act has passed. So congratulations. As we gather here today, let's recommit ourselves to the cause of Tibet. Let's redouble our effort to raise awareness, mobilize support, and advocate for meaningful change. Because together we can make a difference. Together we can build a future where the rights and dignity of all people, including the Tibetan people, are respected and upheld. Thank you.
I would now like to request Honorable Minister of the Department of Information and International Relations, Kalun Norzidomla, to please come on stage and read His Holiness's message for the conference.
Hello, tisztelik. It is a great pleasure to see everyone gathered here today, and I would like to express my appreciation to all of you for your presence at this 9th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups, which is being held here in Brussels. But first of all, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament, Honorable Sekyong, and all our distinguished guests and friends of Tibet gathered here, including our distinguished guest here on the dais, Honorable Mr. Nicholas Pexa, who is the Member of Parliament of European Parliament, and also the President of the Tibet Interest Group in European Parliament, and Dr. Hans-Gert Pottering, who is the former President of the European Parliament, and we also have Mr. Wangbo Teto, who is the former parliamentarian and also the Executive Director of the ICT International Campaign for Tibet based in Netherlands. So with this, I would like to express my appreciation to all of you, and also like to thank you profusely for your strong support and solidarity with the Tibetan people and for the cause of Tibet. So we are very much looking forward to the upcoming few days where we take stock of the current Tibet situation and status, and based on which we hopefully formulate and develop coordinated and action-oriented strategies that will help us in leading us closer to the ultimate goal of resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict through dialogue process based on the middle way policy. And I hope that our conference outcome will help us in strengthening our movement and advocacy, and also help us in restoring the lost dignity, human rights, and freedom of the Tibetan people. So with this, I consider it my deepest honor and a privilege to be sharing with you the precious message from the globally recognized, universally revered, and widely adored icon of peace, compassion, and nonviolence, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama. So I take this opportunity to thank the Kashat Secretariat and also, particularly the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for positively considering and facilitating our earnest request for this invaluable message from His Holiness the Dalai Lama to all of you participating in this important conference. Without further ado, kindly allow me to read out the statement. I send my warmest greetings and Tashidelek to everyone participating in the 9th International Conference of Tibet Support Groups being held in Brussels, Belgium from February 23rd to 25th, 2024. The widespread interest of the international community across the world has been a major source of encouragement and support in our efforts to preserve our identity and keep the Tibetan cause alive. I therefore want to thank all of you who represent those friends and supporters that have voluntarily devoted time and resources to working for the just cause of the Tibetan people. As I often say, we consider you not as pro-Tibetan, but pro-justice. Although the global political environment has been changing rapidly, the fundamental issue of Tibet remains the same. Therefore, I would like to reiterate here some of the points I have made to this conference in the past, as well as on other occasions. The question of Tibet is not merely a matter of justice and human rights, but it is about the preservation of Tibet's unique and distinct culture, which has the potential to contribute to human development. The religious aspects of Buddhism may be of relevance only to Buddhists, but I really feel that Buddhist science, including the science of mind and Buddhist culture, based around compassion and non-violence can be of great benefit to humanity and even to those who do not practice Buddhism or follow any religion. It is also important to note that today more and more Chinese are following Buddhism. Another crucial issue is the ecology of Tibet. It is well known that the plateau provides fresh water resources to more than 2 billion people who make up 30% of the global population. However, due to the climate crisis created by human activities, the rate of warming on the Tibetan plateau is nearly double the global average. This presents a severe threat to the region's water balance. Therefore, protection of the Tibetan environment is truly a global concern. In 2011, I voluntarily and happily devolved my political responsibilities to the elected Tibetan leadership. Since then, I have dedicated my efforts to fulfilling 4 commitments: the promotion of human values, the encouragement of inter-religious harmony, keeping Tibetan Buddhist culture, the basis of our identity, alive, and creating greater awareness and interest in ancient Indian wisdom, focusing on compassion, which is karuna, and non-violence, which is ahimsa. I am sure you will join me in contributing to creating a more peaceful world. It is my hope that before long, the Chinese leadership will understand the real value of Tibet's culture of peace and compassion, which has enormous potential to contribute to enriching both China and world at large. No matter how powerful the People's Republic of China becomes, it is important that China must earn the trust and respect of the international community in building a peaceful world. Despite undergoing great difficulties, the faith and aspiration of our people, the majority of whom are inside Tibet, have remained undiminished. I am confident that our friends and supporters of Tibetans will continue to assist and support our leadership of the Central Tibetan Administration in its efforts to fulfill the aspirations of Tibetans. Their heartfelt wish is to live in freedom and dignity. As the Tibetan saying goes, there will be a time when the sun emerges from behind the clouds. With my prayers and good wishes, signed the Dalai Lama, February 19, 2024. Thank you.
To invite everyone to listen to a video message from Ms. Heidi Hautala, who is a member of parliament from Finland, and she is also one of the vice presidents of the European Parliament and a long-time friend of Tibet.
Dear friends, I'm honored to speak to you today at the 9th International Conference of the Tibet Support Groups. I would like to thank all the co-organizers of this event for their outstanding work for human rights and democracy. As we all know, we are living in challenging geopolitical times. It may often feel like the world can only focus on one crisis at a time, turning a blind eye to another. However, I would like to encourage you all today by telling you that the European Parliament continues to stand with Tibet. In December, the European Parliament strongly condemned the repressive assimilation policies by the Chinese government, especially the boarding school system in Tibet that seeks to eliminate the linguistic, cultural and religious traditions among Tibetans. Forced family separations and efforts to forcibly assimilate an estimated 1 million Tibetan children is a gross human rights violation. This has also been pointed out by 3 UN special rapporteurs and most recently in China's 4th Universal Periodic Review. Several human rights organizations have continuously reported how Chinese authorities have arbitrarily detained human rights defenders and tightened control over civil society, media and the internet. A report by Freedom House last year identified Tibet as the country with the least freedom concerning civil and political rights. However, the Chinese government has neglected these concerns by the international community. The EU should raise the issue of human rights violations in China, particularly the situation in Tibet, at all political and human rights dialogues with the Chinese authorities. First of all, the EU should build pressure on China to comply with all the recommendations provided by member states of the United Nations in the Universal Periodic Review, such as the immediate abolition of the state-run boarding schools in Tibet and the release of arbitrarily detained Tibetans. Secondly, China should allow independent journalists and international observers into the region and refrain from spreading false and misleading information on the actual situation in the region. Thirdly, the EU and member states should call on the Chinese government to re-engage with the representatives of the 14th Dalai Lama to establish genuine autonomy for Tibetans within China. I feel very privileged because I've had several opportunities to meet with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, and those occasions have been truly immemorable, and I feel that I am especially privileged because I know that millions of Tibetans never had a chance to meet with His Holiness. I wish you a great get-together for the well-being of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all Tibetan people. Thank you.
On behalf of the Office of Tibet and the Central Tibetan Administration, I would like to express my gratitude to Ms. Heidi Hautala. Our next speaker needs no introduction. However, since I'm your MC this morning, so I have to follow the tradition of introducing our next speaker. So our next speaker is Professor Hans-Gert Pöttering, former President of the European Parliament, who is currently the representative for European Affairs of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that he chaired from 2010 to 2018. While in the European Parliament, he was a German Christian Democrat member from 1979 to 2014, leading the center-right European People's Party European Democrats group from 1999 to 2007. Professor Pöttering has published widely on various issues of European affairs. His autobiography titled United for the Better, My European Way, published in 2014, has been translated into many languages. But above all, Tibetans fondly remember you as the president who received His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the European Parliament in 2008, when Tibet was going through an upheaval, and we will forever be grateful to you for that. Last November, you traveled to Dharamsala, not long after you had had a surgery to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama after 15 years. And I had the privilege of accompanying you. And following your audience with His Holiness, you promised me that you would return to Dharamsala to celebrate His Holiness's 90th birthday, and we will be looking forward to organizing your visit again. Professor Pöttering, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us this morning. I'll now give you the floor.
Dear Rixin Genhang, dear Mikolas Peksa as chairman of the Tibet Interest Group in the European Parliament, dear Sikyong Penta Tsering as the Prime Minister, the boss of the administration of Tibet, dear ladies and gentlemen, and allow me to say, dear friends. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today, and I want to thank all of you. I was informed you are representatives from 42 countries throughout the world, and I want to thank you for your great engagement to defend the identity of the Tibetan people, and I totally support you. I had the honor, as Rixin Genhang has just mentioned, to see His Holiness the 22nd of November last year in Dharamsala, together with Rixin and together with you and some other friends. And I will never forget this meeting. And His Holiness mentioned the word compassion, and he always mentioned ethics. And this is what I took with me from Dharamsala, from His Holiness: compassion for each person in the world. Why was I in Dharamsala? His Holiness invited me when he had his 85th birthday in 2020. And Rixin, everything was arranged. I think we had the tickets already. And then we had the coronavirus pandemic, and the trip to Dharamsala had to be cancelled. And I wanted to see His Holiness again. And so we did the 22nd of November last year, and I thank you, Rixin, and all your friends helping, that I had the chance to meet His Holiness again. And when I spoke to His Holiness, I had the impression that he believes he will live for a long time, not only 100 years, maybe 110 years. And I said, Your Holiness, so it's sure you become 90 years old in 2 years. And I will be, if I'm still alive, this is a question, 80 years in the same year. And if I'm still alive, I will visit you again. And we said, Rixin, we do it together. You are certainly alive, but in my age, you never know. And I hope it will be possible to meet His Holiness again in 2 years' time. Rixin Genhang mentioned the year 2008. And I will never forget this year. I invited His Holiness, it was a year of the Dialogue of Cultures, and I invited several representatives of religions in the world. And so I invited His Holiness to make a speech the 4th of December 2008. And he spoke about the dignity of the human being. He spoke about peace and reconciliation and the dignity of each human being. And I had really tough discussions with the Chinese representatives. And I would have liked to go to the Olympics in Beijing, but finally I decided not to go to Beijing because I showed my solidarity with the people of Tibet, with the riots everywhere in the world. And I never forget once on German television, it was the first message that I, as President of the European Parliament, said we should consider whether we take part in the Olympic Games in Beijing. So in the end, the world did, but Tibet was on the agenda. And since then, I am not the most popular person with the Chinese government. And you mentioned the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. I received in 2012 an invitation from the Communist Party to visit Beijing, where I had been several times when I was chairman of the European Christian Democrats Party, the European People's Party. And in 2012, they invited me again. And I said, I want to go to Tibet as well. And then the answer was, oh, you are not so young anymore. And it's so high, and you will have physical problems. And I said, this is my risk. And then the answer came back from Beijing, the Communist Party in Tibet does not want to see you. But of course, they in Beijing, they could have overruled it, and they could have said, okay, you are welcome to Tibet. But they didn't say it. And so I rejected to go to China, and I unfortunately could not go to Tibet. And this dream, unfortunately, will never be realized, to go to Lhasa and to go to Tibet. So, but you cannot fulfill all dreams in your life, but I stand with you. And Heidi Hautala, we sat beside each other for many years. She was chairwoman of the Greens, I'm of the Christian Democrats, and we were sitting together. And it's a nice coincidence that she spoke to us as well. And I want to tell you, dear friends, that I'm deeply committed what the European Parliament has decided in December last year, and partly Heidi Hautala mentioned it already. And in one of these recommendations, the European Parliament says, and I want to express my total identity with this position, the ruling Chinese Communist Party, CCP, does not share the same values of European democracies, has become increasingly authoritarian domestically, and promotes governance models internationally that contradict the EU's values. Whereas the promotion and protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law should remain at the center of the relationship between the EU and China, in line with the EU's commitment to upholding these fundamental principles in all areas of its external action, whereas freedom of religion and belief is continuing to deteriorate across mainland China, with the CCP requiring all religions to adhere to the party's ideology, doctrine, and teaching. And in another paragraph, the European Parliament says, the European Parliament insists that China, as a member of the United Nations and as a signatory of 9 human rights treaties under the United Nations, will be held accountable for its increasing human rights violations and efforts to undermine the rules-based order, and fulfills its obligations and commitments under international law by respecting universal human rights and the rule of law according to international standards, to allow independent monitoring of the human rights situation. And then, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, there was another resolution saying in December 2023 as well, Chinese authorities have established an expensive system of the de facto compulsory, highly politicized boarding schools for children aged 4 to 18, requiring them to undergo mandatory education in Mandarin without any opportunity for substantive study of the Tibetan language, history, or culture, whereas approximately 80% of Tibetan children, totaling around 1 million, have been separated from their families by this system, which aims to forcibly assimilate them culturally, religiously, and linguistically into the Han majority, whereas there are almost no private alternatives to these government schools, which are reportedly heavily surveyed. And then it goes on, United Nations experts are concerned that Tibetan children are thus suffering from severe psychological and emotional distress, including loneliness and isolation, and are losing the ability to communicate easily in their native language with their families, contributing to the erosion of their individual and social identity, which violates international human rights and may amount to genocide. And I learned when I was in Dharamsala, I learned the word cultural genocide, and this is unfortunately the reality. And then the resolution says, strongly condemns the European Parliament the repressive assimilation policies throughout China, especially the boarding school system in Tibet, that seek to eliminate the distinct linguistic, cultural, and religious traditions among Tibetans and other minorities, such as Uyghurs. And I tell you, the Uyghurs, they are Muslims. And I tell you, I am as a Christian, I prefer a peaceful Muslim to a violent Christian. I prefer all people in the world, what religion they may have. If they are peaceful, they are our brothers and sisters, and we have to defend their identity, that they can live in peace and defend their identity and religion. And then the European Parliament calls for the immediate abolishment of the boarding school system imposed on children in Tibet, and the practice of family separations is highlighted by UN experts in February 2023. Further calls on the Chinese authorities to allow the establishment of private Tibetan schools. Welcomes the US decision imposing restrictions on visas to Chinese officials tied to the boarding school system in Tibet, urges the member states and the Council to adopt similar targeted sanctions, calls on the member states of the European Union, of course, and the Vice President, High Representative, that is Josep Borrell, who was my predecessor as President of the European Parliament, to demand that the Chinese government issue visas to European diplomats to visit boarding schools across Tibet, allow independent journalists and international observers into the region, and refrain from spreading fake news. Recalls the importance of the EU raising the issue of human rights violations in China, particularly the situation in Tibet, at all political and human rights dialogues with the Chinese authorities, reiterates its call on the Chinese government to re-engage with the representatives of the 14th Dalai Lama to establish genuine autonomy for Tibetans within China, urges the Chinese authorities to release the Panchen Lama and refrain from interfering in the designation of the Tibetan spiritual leader. And finally, instructs its president, the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, she's a very engaged lady, instructs her to forward this resolution to the EU institutions, the United Nations and the government and parliament of the People's Republic of China. So far, the resolution of the 14th, I think, or 13th of December last year. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm deeply committed to your convictions and ideals, and the core of everything is the dignity of each human being. And this is a difference to a totalitarian state. They believe in the collective system, and they allow their ideology, all means, all instruments, to destroy the dignity of the human being. And so we are united, you, myself, and many others, that we believe in the individual, which of course has a responsibility for the society, that is sure. But at the core is the dignity of each human being. And so I am at your side, and let's always defend human rights and the dignity of the human being. In my best regards and wishes, with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, with the Tibetan people, and with all of you, I'm at your side.
Thank you, Professor Pottering, for your very inspiring speech, and thank you for highlighting the European Parliament resolution. It was the first resolution during the mandate of this Parliament, so we were very pleased when it was adopted. We had attempted it a number of times before, but we were not successful, but in December, finally, it was adopted. May I now invite Kongwa Sikyong, President of the Central Tibetan Administration, to deliver the keynote address.
This is shaking, it doesn't. Shaking all the time. Okay. I want to thank. Did we do something wrong? Okay. Yeah, this is much better. Thank you. I want to thank Professor Hans-Gert Pottering for gracing this conference of Tibet Support Group. His leadership and his dedication to the Tibetan cause, which he himself talked about, is worth the remembering by the Tibetans, because we went through a lot of difficulties during those times, particularly during the Olympics, when you were one of the few lone voices going against the Chinese government. And I would assume there are not many people who understood China as much as you did at an early stage. Because even now, when we travel around the world, we find that we have to educate a lot of countries on the real intentions and motivations of China, which we continue to do so. Since I took over, we visited about 24 different countries in the last 2 years. There are many countries who have no idea of what China is doing. Therefore, your leadership is very much valued. Thank you very much for your visit to Dharamsala. Unfortunately, I was traveling around that time. Our Minister for Information and International Relations was also traveling, so you had the opportunity to meet with our speaker after your audience with His Holiness. And I also want to thank Nicholas Pixer as the president of the Tibet Intergroup in the European Parliament for hosting this conference along with the International Campaign for Tibet Brussels. Mikola, of course, coming from Czech Republic, I had the honor of meeting their former president for a brief while at the Forum 2000, and we also had the opportunity to meet with all your leadership in the Senate and the House, who were very, very warm in welcoming us. It's not just myself, but also our Minister for Information and International Relations and others who are concerned about Tibet. And Czech was also host to many conferences that were held in the last 1 year. As we speak, just last night, we had the opportunity to meet with Jens, your Pelowski, or the foreign minister. I had the opportunity to meet him in Washington, D.C. for a short while, and our Minister of Information and International Relations also met him last year. So our relation with Czech Republic goes way back after Czech gained independence, and when His Holiness was the first person to be invited to Czech Republic as an honored guest after their independence. And I also want to thank the International Campaign for Tibet for co-hosting this organization. Mr. Wongbo Jantong is represented here. And many of you have come from long distances. Our friends from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Taiwan, and then from Latin America, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, some of the countries that I visited last year. And then, of course, all the representatives from Europe, South Asia, our host countries, India, Nepal. Of course, most of the representatives are all from the free world, not so many from countries that are authoritarian, but we also have representatives from Russia. And I also want to thank Dolkun and our friends from Hong Kong for being part of this conference to talk about the challenges they face and how we can, in the future, work together. So at this point of time, I just want to focus on what our policy is and what our strategy is at this point of time. Since we took over in May 2021 as the Sikyong, we are fully committed to follow His Holiness Dalai Lama's wisdom, whether it's to do with politics or whether it's to do with welfare of the Tibetans in exile. So His Holiness is fully committed to the middle way policy, middle way, avoiding extreme polarities. In this case, the one polarity is the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, and the other polarity is the present situation of Tibet under the repressive Chinese government. This policy remains the same, and His Holiness, in his message today, also talked about the universal values and his commitments. And he also talked about the importance of Buddhist culture that has the potential to spread more peace in this world. His Holiness also talked about the environmental importance of Tibet, that is not only important only to the Tibetans, but for the whole region and globally. But in addition to that, we talk about the middle way, our new strategy to focus on the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. Because if there is no recognition for the historical status of Tibet as an independent state, then there is no leverage for middle way. Because every country keeps saying Tibet is part of China, whereas we would like these countries to call Tibet an occupied country. Then every country, when they say that, now in the last 2 years, I said I've been visiting so many different countries and meeting with a lot of foreign ministries, and we keep telling them that if you keep repeating this statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then you are going against international law. Because whether it happened to Tibet 70 years ago or whether it's happening to Ukraine today, it's the same international law after the formation of United Nations and the definition of modern state today. And the second thing we tell the international community is that on the one hand, international community keeps parroting what Chinese government want them to say, that Tibet is part of PRC. And on the other hand, they say that they support negotiations between His Holiness Dalai Lama or representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. So we tell them these two don't go together, because China rules Tibet with an iron hand, and the whole international community keeps repeating what China wants them to say, basically parroting, not reading or understanding Tibet's history. Then the third thing we tell, then there is no reason for China to come and talk to us. If there is no historical recognition of Tibet as an independent state, and while the whole international community keeps repeating the statement that Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? The whole international community is removing the very basis for negotiation. And the third point we make is, why is China not asking other countries to say that other regions are part of China, but why only Tibet is part of China? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. And they are trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. As we hear about their statements in the United Nations and all that, they keep saying no country recognizes Tibet. Now, who made that happen? It's China, who forced every country to repeat what they want them to say. So we have to change that. So the reason for me to say this, or the CTA to take this position, is fourfold. Of course, one is the geopolitical importance of Tibet. And when we talk about the geopolitical importance of Tibet, it also talks about Tibet's history. And I have 4 reasons why we talk about Tibet's history. One is to send a message to the Chinese government that you cannot change Tibet's history. History is in the past. It has to be determined by historians. That is why when His Holiness was put forward with this precondition that His Holiness should say that Tibet is part of China, His Holiness said, I'm not a historian. Let's leave history to historians. What matters through the middle way policy is to find a peaceful solution for the Tibetan people. So China cannot alter history. History cannot be rewritten. It has to be studied by historians, and historians should come out with a correct statement. So these days when I travel around, I carry Michael Van Praag's book, Tibet Brief 2020, and a Chinese professor who had written a rebuke to China's claim on Tibet. And it's coming from a Chinese, not a Tibetan or an international expert. So Michael, being an expert on international law, has worked with more than 100 scholars from around in Asia, not just Tibet, and came out with a conclusion that whether it's Tibet-Yuan relation or Tibet-Ming relation or Tibet-Qing relation, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. And Professor Lau, being a Chinese, he used to say that he used to be intrigued by this question as to why Chinese government is asking every other country to say Tibet is part of China, if Tibet had already been part of China. So that prompted him to do this study, and all the materials that he collected were from the website of the Chinese Communist Party, from the Yuan to the Qing, to the Ming, to the Qing. And he categorically proves that imperial China, if you can consider the Yuan, the Mongols, and the Qings, the Manchus as Chinese, then imperial China has never considered Tibet as part of China. So with these 2 books, I asked the foreign ministries to read Tibetan history, then take a position as to why or how we should act. So these are the 2 books. If you have not, I'm sure many of you have read these 2 books. If you have not read, please And these two are powerful tools because these have come out in the recent times. It was not done in the 60s or 70s where you don't have too much access to reference materials. And many of the official government records have also been declassified, so there are many more sources compared to what was there before. So this, I want to set the tone for the working groups to follow, because this is the official position of the Central Tibetan Administration. And if we have to achieve something, then we have to achieve in concert with each other, in cooperation with each other, putting all our resources together, because there's no time to step back. The only way is to move forward, whether you follow independence or whether you follow autonomy. And the third reason why I talk about history is for the Tibetan youngsters to study Tibetan. If Tibetans don't study Tibetan history, no one else will, apart from Tibet supporters or perhaps some scholars who want to study Tibetan history. And the fourth reason why we talk about Tibetan history is also because we have independence advocates, we have middle way advocates within the Tibetan community, and there's no reason to fight amongst ourselves or argue amongst ourselves. For independence seekers, it is very important that you have to prove Tibet's independence if you want to seek future independence for Tibet. And middle way is the official position of the Central Tibetan Administration. I just want to stress for those who are not in the know that to change the middle way policy, we have to follow a certain process. It's not just that I got elected as a Sikyong and I can change the policy just like that. There has to be a process of referendum, and it'll be a very public process, not just something that will be done behind the scenes. So keeping these in mind, I see no reason why we cannot all work together. And I also want to stress that at this conference, you can see a generational shift in the Tibetan movement. Now you can see a lot of younger generations of Tibetans who have taken over the leadership of the Tibetan associations. As you know, wherever we have a sizable number of Tibetans, we have Tibetan associations. Today in this conference, presidents of most of these Tibetan associations are represented. And then we have also floated this platform called the Voluntary Tibet Advocacy Group, meant for all Tibetans, but particularly for younger generations of Tibetans to take the mantle of leadership. And it's our responsibility, our generation's responsibility, to make sure that the younger generations of Tibetans are well equipped to take on the responsibility. As Tibetans say, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And Professor Hans-Gert Pottering mentioned about his meeting with His Holiness and His Holiness' commitment to live long. And he keeps repeating this to us as well. And in the last many public gatherings, His Holiness always said that I'll live for more than 2 decades, I'll live up to 113 years of age. So I keep telling our Chinese friends, you're waiting for the 14th Dalai Lama to die. And this message is for you. Now we will see whether Communist Party will outlive His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Kong Sikyong. I would now like to invite the Executive Director of the International Campaign for Tibet, Mr. Wongpo Tiethong, to come on stage and do the vote of thanks.
So, good morning. Dear participants, distinguished guest speakers, it's an honor for me to stand here and conduct this vote of thanks. I want to extend first my heartfelt gratitude to those who have played pivotal roles in bringing us together here today. It is with immense pleasure that I express our appreciation to each and every individual who has contributed to the success of this event. First and foremost, I would like to extend my sincerest thanks to Kalin Nunzin Dorma and her team, her dedicated team, for their exceptional efforts in organizing and managing this event. Lecturer, is lecturer here? Do I see him somewhere? No. Lecturer, your hard work and utmost professionalism in piecing together the myriad elements of this conference have paved the way for its success. Let us take a moment to recognize the unwavering dedication and commitment of those who lead the Tibetan struggle. At the forefront stands Sikyong Bembatsering. Thank you for reminding us of this importance and strategic ideas about your policies here. Your thoughtful leadership has yielded remarkable successes, and we eagerly anticipate further achievements, both in the US Congress and beyond. We are honored to have the presence of Kongong Snon Dempa, the Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament, among us. Tibetan democracy is a shining example for the successful transformation of a society. It has an impact for Tibetans, it has an impact for Inner Asia and throughout Asia. I must also express gratitude to the Department of International Relations and Information for hosting this conference along with the intergroup, and we have Mr. Peksa here, and the ICT Brussels. Thank you, Mr. Peksa, and thank you, Tenju Gyatso, who is the newly appointed IC President and my new and very tough boss. I would like to highlight the fact that, that this conference will have an impact. This 9th TSG conference is a unique meeting place. Please use the opportunity to network with people, to forge new friendships, renew your relationships, and have interesting private conversations. I can tell you that in some cases this conference resulted in the past not only in exciting political ideas and actions, but lead to lifelong relations, in some cases even to marriages. We see today also some friends here from other groups like the Yugo friends, and then from Hong Kong, and from the Democratic Alliance for China. So all of you, thank you for coming here and interacting with us. This morning we listened to Mr. Peksa, and in the lead up to this conference, you had some intensive discussions going on with the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama here in Brussels. I hope that this will result in a collective effort and campaign in connection with the European elections. Next year, we will hopefully have here in Brussels and in Strasbourg a strong representation of MPs throughout Europe, from all over Europe, supporting the Tibetan issue. Professor Gerd Pöttering, thank you for speaking to us and reminding us of the importance of His Holiness's message. It's really about compassion, it's about peace and human dignity. And your principal stand for Tibet, for human rights in 2008 is important for us, very important. Thank you again. You also reminded us that the EU's European values stand against what China at the moment is projected throughout the world. We see a lot of Chinese interference here in Europe, and I think we all together have an obligation to stand against this bad influence in Europe. Now, looking forward, my heart is filled with optimism for the future. I saw yesterday Genze Droga, one of the singing non-prisoners of Tibettv, welcoming the participants of this conference and thanking us for our work. No, it should be us to thank those who fight and fought for the freedom of the Tibetan people, and still doing so. The people inside Tibet are our source of inspiration. We have some persons here who fled quite recently from Tibet and will provide us with first-hand accounts and analysis of the situation inside Tibet. Dr. Gyalo is one of them, and I would like to thank him and Tibet Action Net for the great work in connection with the colonial boarding school system. Finally, there's one person who I shouldn't miss to thank. I recently saw a video in which His Holiness was remarking that Lama Thundrup, the small boy from AMDO did quite a good job. Quite a good job, a hell of a good job, I would say. Your Holiness, you are the main source of whatever strength we feel in ourselves. Your lifelong commitment for the happiness of the world and of the Tibetan people, and your dream for Tibet to become a zone of peace in the heart of Asia is our North Star. We look forward to 2025 to celebrate your 90th birthday. Now, I want you all to close your eyes. Maybe you don't want to close your eyes. It's okay also if you leave your eyes open. And think of the wonderful activities you have undertaken in the past 5 years. Remember your best ideas, the demonstration you participated in, the successful meetings you had with government officials, standing outside on the streets with banners, maybe your best social media tweets and posts, the positive feelings that you experienced, and also remember those who suffer at the moment from war in Ukraine, in the Middle East. And now open your eyes, turn to the right, and receive a thank you from your right neighbor for whatever you have done in the past. Now to the left, and thank your neighbor for his work and his contribution to a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tethong. We'll now break out for coffee. I think everyone needs a cup of coffee if you are still not awake. So we have about, what time is it now? We are coming back at 10:30 sharp. 15 minutes.